It's absolutely freezing on the East Coast, but did that affect Glass's box office? Let's talk numbers. Welcome to the Box Office Prediction Show. My name's Josiah, and here I talk all about box office numbers and how well the newest movies do at the box office. I compare them to past movies and see if I can predict them right. This past weekend, Glass opened up in theaters, and I don't know if you got out to see it with its cold weather, but it was a pretty good flick. And this was a point of contention last week because this movie had around a 36% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I wasn't sure how well it was going to do with fans in the long run. As far as opening weekend, I thought it was going to do pretty well. So let's jump right into this week's actual box office numbers. First off, in fifth place is the Spider-Verse. So there's one movie that I'll get to in a bit that I actually kind of left out, and I didn't even think it was coming out into theaters. But Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse continues to do very well in its run. This past weekend, it made $7.57 million, and this is in its sixth run. This is only about a 16% drop from last week, which is a pretty good run for the Spider-Verse. And I'm hoping that this will continue, and maybe we'll even get a sequel, which I bet we will. And this is the next movie on my list that is, I left off, which was Dragon Ball Broly, and I'm not a Dragon Ball fan, so excuse me if I just pronounced that wrong. This movie opened very small in about 1,000 theaters across the U.S., and it opened to $9.74 million. So I left this one out, and so that's actually what ended up bumping my prediction last week, which was A Dog's Way Home. Bumped it right off my list, and A Dog's Way Home did actually end up doing around 6 or 7 million, which is what I predicted, but Dragon Ball nudged its way in there. And next up on my list, number 3 is Aquaman. So Aquaman's continuing to crush. It is now officially the highest grossing DC film of all time. That's above Dark Knight, that's above Dark Knight Rises, that's above all the new DCEU films, Batman vs. Superman, all of them. It's number 1 at the box office worldwide. Now, this made $10 million this week, which is a little bit below my projections, but, I mean, I projected $11 million, so it was pretty darn close. And its second place is The Upside. So, The Upside made $15 million. I projected it was going to make around 12. So, again, it beat my expectations from what I thought it was going to make. This was about a 26% drop, which is, it's expected. It's going to drop off, but it's doing pretty well. And first on this list, as you probably guessed it, I mean, there wasn't that much competition, is Glass. So how well did Glass do? Well, Glass actually ended up making $40 million at the box office. Now, over its 4-day weekend, which is the Martin Luther King Day weekend, it made around $47 million, which is the the third best Martin Luther King Day opening of all time, behind American Sniper and Ride Along. And with its 3-day opening, which is what is usually calculated, it is the 4th highest January opening of all time, and that's behind American Sniper, Ride Along, and Kung Fu Panda 3 of all movies. So this movie did pretty darn well. It actually ended up beating Split by about 400,000, I believe. So it was a pretty close race between those two opening weekend. And actually, if you look at the per theater numbers, Split did better. Now, it's interesting to look at because how well or how bad did the snowstorm over the weekend hurt the box office numbers? Well, that's an interesting question, and I'm over here on the East Coast, and yeah, there was a pretty big ice snowstorm that could have affected Glass's box office. Now, I crunched the numbers a little bit, and if you look at the per theater averages, and even if a quarter of the people just from the East Coast didn't go out to see Glass because of the snowstorm, so that's saying they were going to go see it, but then they heard about the snowstorm, they didn't want to drive in the conditions, and they said, no, I'm not going to see this movie. I'll wait until next weekend. Even if a quarter of those people did that, Glass would only make around $2 million more than what it did. So really, it wasn't that big of a deal. It would have been competing more with the Kung Fu Panda at that point as the third highest opening, but it's not. It wasn't going to reach that American Sniper level for a January open. So I did pretty well with my predictions this past week. I had all the movies in order, except for, of course, Dragon Ball. So let's talk about next week, January 25th through the 27th. This is another interesting weekend coming up because we have two big movies opening up, and that is The Kid Who Would Be King and Serenity. So these movies, I really don't know that much about them. The Kid Who Would Be King is a movie about, it's a kid movie, and Serenity is more of like an adult type of movie, so it's kind of counter programming right there. And so that's just to give you a preview of what's upcoming this week. Now, how well are they going to do? I don't know, because as I'll get to Serenity, I don't think it's been marketed very much. So 5th place on my list, I have Aquaman, and I have that making $6.5 million. So this is about another 37% drop. I'm comparing that again to Wonder Woman at its point in its box office run around 6 weeks, which Aquaman and Wonder Woman have been pretty on par with their drops each week. So 6.5 million. We'll see if it gets knocked off in the next upcoming weeks or if it stays in it at the 5th place. And the one movie that isn't on my list at this week is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, dropping off the top 5 list. We'll see if it can pull anything off. And at number 4, I have The Upside. So again, this is going to be around a 35% drop, I predict. It's out there to see in the theaters, but I think a lot of the people that have seen it who have wanted to see it have seen it, and at this point it's just some of the stragglers. So it'll probably make around $11 million is what I project. And in 3rd place, this is a new movie, Anne Hathaway movie, actually a pretty superb cast in all of it. Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway star, and Anne Hathaway is kind of being abused by her husband and asks Matthew McConaughey to nix him, to kill him, take him out on the boat and shoot him. And so it's, like I said, it's more of an adult movie. I haven't seen this marketed very well, so I have to say I'm comparing this a little bit to Taken, which opened to around $24 million. But I think Taken was a little bit more, it had a little bit more hype to it. So I'm saying Serenity is opening to $18 million. Next up on my list is The Kid Who Would Be King. So this is a kids movie, and traditionally kids movies do very well in January. I mean, you have Paddington 2, you have Kung Fu Panda 3, which I mentioned, it's one of the highest openings. And so this is a pretty good month to bring the kids out to the movies. And so I'm predicting that this movie will do similar to, not as well as Kung Fu Panda 3, because that's the 3rd movie in a successful franchise. But I'm also comparing it to House with a Clock on Its Walls. That's kind of what this movie reminds me of, with Jack Black, that was released last September. I'm throwing this movie out there. It's going to make $25 million in its opening weekend, which is going to do pretty well. And maybe there are a lot of kids out there that go to see it that I'm not expecting, but we'll see how it does. And finally, in 1st place, I have Glass. Yet again, it's going to be number 1 at the box office. That while this movie struggled with the critics, it's actually doing really, really well with the audience. It has around a 74% on Rotten Tomatoes. So 7 out of 10 people who saw this movie, the general audience, liked this movie, whereas around 3 out of 10 critics who saw it liked it. So this is another critics versus audience type of movie. It's a little bit divided amongst fans who do like the ending. That's the point of contention, is the ending, the M. Night Shyamalan twist. Let me know, did you see it, and what did you think of the twist down below? Maybe try not to spoil it for others, but let me know your general thoughts. So I think this movie is going to hold on to its spot at $26 million. It's going to hit around a 35% drop, which is very similar to Split, which had a 35% drop in 2017. So this movie is going to continue to do well, and we'll see what happens in the following week. So that's Glass number 1, Kid Who Would Be King at 2, Serenity at 3, The Upside at 4, and Aquaman at number 5. What are your guys' lists, and what do you think is going to do well next weekend? This is a new type of format that I tried, so please let me know what you thought about it. I got away a little bit from the whiteboard and tried to improve everything that I'm doing, so I'd love to know your thoughts. Should I go back to the old format or keep this new one with the graphics? Thanks for watching, and we'll talk numbers next week.